Okay, Chapter 14, Footwear for Wilderness Trails. Much advice has been offered about the selection of footwear for extensive use in rough and difficult country. A great deal of this counsel, unfortunately, has come from those whose backgrounds have been more theoretical than practical. Many important considerations have been both misinterpreted and incorrectly emphasized, if not omitted entirely. Additionally, confusing is the understandable fact that not all the popular shoes offered and advertised are by any means desirable under many outdoor conditions. Salesmen, not always experienced and conscientious, are likely to urge the makes and incidentally the sizes that are in stock. The matter is a very serious one. The sportsman taking to the woods for perhaps the first time on a trip that requires long and difficult foot travel is apt to discover when it's too late that he is irrevocably committed to footwear that will handicap or badly cripple him, thus ruining the grand outing he has maybe been planning for years. Perhaps this writer had better qualify as to experience. To a certain extent, I might be called a professional walker. I served 22 of my 40 years of military service in the infantry. There we certainly hiked 10 times as much over rugged terrain as the average hunter and fisherman. There, too, I had to attend not only to my own footwear and foot care, I also had to supervise that of large numbers of men under my command. In this latter duty, I didn't feel I was in a position where I could afford to make any mistakes. Staring at me over the years was a statement included by Horace Kephart, in which has long been the best and most widely read and accepted of outdoor manuals. What Kephart wrote was, Lieutenant Whelen, so well known to us as a sportsman and military authority, says of it, the Munson Army last, in the light of what the Army now knows, sore feet are absolutely inexcusable. The presence of sore feet in an officer command is a cause for investigation as to the efficiency of that officer. During the 18 years since my retirement from active service, I have, you might say, been a professional outdoorsman with a very large mileage of rough hiking in all kinds of country and climates. 'Tis a feat to fit the feet. The shoe size you wear in the city and the one that the ordinary salesman there will measure you for will perhaps do well enough for the not more than 3 or 4 miles of walking which is all many an individual covers on an outing. But beware of this size of shoe for a daily tramp of 8 to 20 miles over wild country, even though fairly open bird cover if it is a bit hilly. One such excursion in city-sized footwear will almost certainly lay you up with blisters and abrasions. After 3 or 4 miles of tramping over rugged terrain, your feet swell considerably because of the repeated and varying pressure of walking and because of the increased blood supply that is pumped into them because of the stimulation of exercise. The shoes you select must be large enough to remain comfortable when your feet are in this enlarged condition. The right sort of socks. The simple but all-important formula for wilderness walking is heavy socks and big shoes. Regardless of heat or cold, dryness or wet, only wool socks are suitable for long hikes. These may vary from thin to medium during the summer and from medium to heavy during the frosty months. Throughout the year, however, you want only genuine top quality, finely processed and well-made woolens. Don't have anything to do with shoddy if you can possibly avoid it. Poor woolen mats. They contain impurities that irritate the feet. They wear poorly. As for loosely and skimpily knit socks, these are an abomination from the first day you put them on. A few people's skin seems to be allergic to wool. Such individuals can often wear thin socks of some other material under the wool with advantage. These may be made of cotton. Some individuals select nylon, which is certainly long-wearing, but which, for a lot of us, is a lot too slippery unless either worn too tightly or unless gartered up in some manner, neither of which is compatible with the outdoor routine. Taking the thickness of your socks into consideration, here is a general rule you can apply in selecting the ideal size of footwear for hard outdoor wear. With one pair of thin or medium wool socks, have your shoes one full size larger and one full size wider than your proper fit in city shoes. For heavy socks, have them 1 1/2 sizes larger and wider. If half sizes are not available, increase to the next full size. For the additional socks, they may be desirable in extremely cold weather. Experiment to get the same comparative freedom of fit as above. Breaking in footwear. It is highly important that you break in new outdoor footwear to fit your feet well in advance of a trip. Some of us have feet that are differently shaped from normal, such deformities being more or less caused by past improper, if stylish, fittings of city shoes. The last on which good outdoor shoes are made are designed for normal extremities. When the resulting shoes are new, even when correctly fitted, they may bring undue pressure on parts of your foot. The new footwear will gradually stretch at these points, however, if broken in slowly and easily. There are two functional ways of breaking in new leather shoes. You can do it gradually by hiking 2 miles the first day, 3 miles the second, and so on up to 5 miles, by which time the process should be completed. The second method consists of standing in 4 inches of water for 15 minutes, then hiking until the shoes dry on your feet. High-top boots. Did you ever notice the shoes of the professional walker, the alpinist, or the marching apparel of our infantry? We will find no high tops here. You'll see rather a height of not more than 7 inches is measured in the rear from the bottom of the heel to the top. High tops almost always sag and wrinkle more or less at the ankles. This can bring pressure to bear on the Achilles tendon at the back of your ankle. It is true that this becomes negligible in the case of gradually softened and well broken in leather tops, and that in any boot it can be offset to a large extent by inserting some stiffener such as folded heavy paper or a piece of birch bark. Unless there is a definite and valid reason for high tops, however, the fact remains that this pressure, if not relieved, will set up a painful inflammation of the sheath through which the greatest tendon of our body runs. The only cure for this is 10 days off your feet. My regiment was issued a then new type of shoe with 9-inch tops back in 1911, when the Army was experimenting with shoes. These were almost exactly like the majority of sportsmen's boots now advertised and illustrated. Shortly thereafter, my regiment was ordered on a 300-mile practice march to test this footwear. 30% of the command suffered from this inflammation, medically known as synovitis. That ended the experiment. There's also the weight factor. A boot with a 10-inch top will weigh about 8 ounces more than one which is 6 inches high. That is an additional half pound to be lifted 3 inches high and to be carried 28 inches ahead about 2,500 times every mile. Such additional expenditure of energy tells like the dickens on a long all-day tramp. Getting your hiking shoes 6 inches or not over 7 inches high. Leave the high-top boots for horsemen for exceptionally wet and muddy country and for bad snake regions. Paratroopers wear high boots for other reasons, and they have little walking to do. Care of the feet. Three precautions will usually suffice. Wear only well-fitting and fairly new socks with no rough seams nor unduly harsh darned spots. If your feet are tender, dust both them and your socks the first week with foot powder. Wash your feet at least every night and change your socks daily. When the going is rough, as a matter of fact, it is refreshing to stop, when possible, during the day and bathe the feet. A lot of us carry an extra pair of socks to switch to at that time. Good woolen socks are easily washed without shrinking with soap and barely warm water. They should be rinsed, gently squeezed reasonably free of moisture without wringing, and stretched back into shape to dry slowly, preferably in the open breeze, but in any event well back from the campfire. Canvas sneakers. Ordinary rubber-soled sneakers and basketball shoes are popular along fairly smooth wilderness ways such as the Appalachian Trail, and in comparatively dry country. For rugged use, do not buy the low ones, however. Select rather those with canvas tops about 6 inches high. The rubber soles should be roughly corrugated or substantially cleated as a safeguard against slipping. The chief advantage afforded by such footwear is that of lightness, which is a joy. They are best worn with one pair of medium-weight woolen socks. They are not very durable. 100 miles over rough terrain is about the limit of most, but they are comparatively cheap. They soon wet through in rain and even in morning dew. This makes no particular difference, however, for they dry out quickly and without becoming stiff. They are painful and almost impossible in rough scree, sliding rock, and along stony shores. They're fine for still hunting in crisp country. Both of us have even used them successfully for hunting sheep and goat during the early fall in the dry belt of British Columbia, where their negligible weight has been very much appreciated. They are also preeminently the shoes for boys on summer hiking trips. Bird shooter shoes. These are oiled leather shoes, usually of mock as well as true moccasin type, with composition soles and heels. The true moccasin shoe, of course, is built about a single piece of leather which extends all the way under the foot. Beneath this entity is attached the sole. To make sure that a shoe is a true moccasin, look and feel inside the toe to ascertain if a single area of leather forms both bottom and sides. This footwear is made by a dozen manufacturers of sporting shoes under many different names. Worn with thin or medium woolen socks, such shoes are very satisfactory for bird shooting and in general for longer hikes over trails. In fairly steep country, however, they should have soft crepe or heavily cleated rubber soles. Being fairly light, they make quite satisfactory footwear for hunting mountain game in the higher western mountains when they are provided with suitable soles, which we will discuss in a moment. Army marching shoes. The old type marching shoes used by our infantry are of leather, with the smooth side turned functionally in and the rough side forming the exterior. There is no lining. The soles are usually composition. The shoes are only 6 inches high and are made on the Munson Army last. The last is, in my estimation, the best that has even been devised for the normal American man's undeformed foot. These shoes can usually be obtained from any of the many dealers in Army surplus goods and at what are usually very reasonable prices. All the remarks about bird shooter shoes apply to these also. Rubber bottoms and leather tops. Shoes with rubber bottoms and leather tops are made by many manufacturers for practically all wear unless there is a definite reason to the contrary. They should be purchased with tops only 6 or 7 inches high. For extremely wet country like Newfoundland, where in many areas you sink almost every step in several inches of water, the tops had better be 8 inches. In muskeg areas of the continental Northwest, where even in winter the periodical Chinooks and the almost constant overflow make for slushy going, you may have a real need the year round for tops as much as 10 inches high. These boots should be worn with insoles and one or more pairs of wool socks. It is not a bad idea to get an extra pair of insoles so that a dry pair will be available each day. Felt is a favorite. For those who do not care for the flat-footed sensation that is characteristic of most such rubbers, leather insoles with arch support steel shanks, if you want them, are available. For very cold weather, these may be secured with clipped lambskin next to the feet. LL Bean Inc. of Freeport, Maine is one supplier. The better boots of this sort are ideal for deer and other big game hunting in the fall, except in the steepest country, because they are almost noiseless and because they can be kept water repellent clear to the top. They can also be used in winter, although rubber gets pretty cold around 20 degrees below zero, and a steel stirrup feels mighty frosty against them when the thermometer drops much below that range. One of us, however, has consistently found them preferable when afoot during such temperatures. Often hidden overflow from brooks and rivers can then be a serious problem, for regular channels freeze in the intense cold and water is forced to the surface, where many times it spreads concealed under thin ice and snow. With lambskin insoles and 2 pairs of heavy socks, such boots are not too cold. The low-topped ones are not uncomfortable or clammy like rubber boots, if worn with adequate insoles and not laced too tightly. The insoles and socks compress with each step and pump air in and out, ventilating the feet. These boots are by no means out for warm weather. I have worn them all day and every day all summer for 16 years at my New England summer home, where the grass is soaked with dew until noon, and there are many bog swamps. Throughout eastern Canada, they are donned practically universally, and even the Indians are coming to prefer them to moccasins during the summer and fall. More and more trappers and prospectors in the north are shifting to them. When the rubber bottoms wear out, you can have new shells attached to the leather tops at considerable savings. They're not good for wear in the very steep mountains of the west, particularly not on abrupt snow-covered slopes. I darn near broke my fool neck and did sprain my ankle on such a precipitous incline in Montana some years ago when wearing them. They are treacherous on smooth ice, too, although for traversing occasional short stretches encountered during a trip, creepers or light crampons can be used to offset this hazard. For deer and moose country and for northern canoe results, they are the most satisfactory of all footwear. Mountain boots. Mountain boots are for use in steep mountains of our continental west and northwest, for the rougher country off the usual hiking trails for climbers, and for the hunting of sheep and goat and grizzlies in the taller regions. Boots for such terrain were not obtainable ready-made in the United States until very recently. Mountain climbers usually imported their footwear from Europe and from two Canadian makers. It is tempting provenance to attempt to negotiate extremely steep and uneven mountain country with the soles that are slanted on almost all sporting footwear in the United States market. For climbing into higher peaks where precipitous rock, snow, and ice conditions must be bested, the shoe should be of the heavy alpine type. The alpinist does not usually hike for miles. His daily efforts rather are short if severe. He needs a shoe that can be pounded down hard, and that will stick right there. The hunter of big game in tall mountains needs a slightly lighter shoe. His day's hunt may take him many miles. Almost certainly, however, he will come on dangerously perpendicular country, and particularly in the final stock for mountain game. There must not slip. The soles of his mountain hunting shoes should be similar to those of the alpinist, or he will run great risk of a crippling fall, if not death itself. To that, both of us can strongly testify. I've already mentioned my experience in Montana. The first stone mountain sheep the other of us shot, he stalked while wearing rubber-bottomed boots. The only way he could work his way across some icy slants that dropped off in nothing were more substantial than ozone was by driving his hunting knife into the crust and using it for a hand grip until he could set himself sufficiently to repeat the procedure. If you will examine the hooves of mountain sheep and goat, you will see that the outer rim of each hoof consists of a hard shell with a sharp edge where it contacts the ground. The interior of the hoof has a comparatively soft pad, not greatly unlike crepe rubber. The entire foot is a fine example of how a sole of a safe mountain shoe should be constructed. Hobnails or rubber cleats. Two types of soles are preferred, each having its advocates. There are the hobnailed varieties. Hobnails can be applied in any of the bird shooter or army marching shoes, provided they have leather soles. Nails and calks will not, of course, stick in their composition or rubber bottoms. Hobnailed boots are excellent for alpine climbing, particularly on ice and glaciers, although they are a little noisy for hunting. My own experience in hunting and climbing throughout British Columbia and Alberta has indicated that the hobnails are best arranged as shown in the accompanying sketch. The square Swiss edging nails are placed an inch apart around the edge of the sole and heel. The sharp square edges of these heavy nails ensure against front, back, and side slipping on any surface except hard, smooth rock. The Swiss edging nails you may obtain from at least 4 of our leading sporting goods outfitters who cater to mountain climbers. Your bootmaker or cobbler will be able to install them. They should be cleated all the way through the edge of the sole outside the uppers. The round interior nails shown are ordinarily cone-headed hobnails, which are procurable anywhere. They prevent slipping to some extent. Their principal function, however, is to keep the inside of the sole from wearing too fast. They should be cleated through the outer leather sole only, never through the inner sole, or they will eventually dig into your feet prohibitively. This means an extra job for the shoemaker. Regardless of this, make certain that he does not cleat these through the inner sole. Such soles are very safe, satisfactory, and durable. The only objection to them are that they are sometimes noisy for hunting and that you should remove them before entering a house, for they literally play hob with the floor. Many experienced mountain men were coming to prefer heavily cleated or lugged rubber soles, which can be applied to any suitable leather sole by practically any shoemaker. They have square cleats or lugs about 1/2 to 1 inch square that project at least 1/2 inch below the rubber sole proper. These are usually quite satisfactory. They stick well on all steep pitches and in snow. They are superior to hobnails on smooth rock, although not on ice. Furthermore, they can be almost noiseless. There are several domestic soles of this type which are readily procurable. At this writing, however, all seem to be made of too soft a rubber. They wear and round off at the extreme outer edges where sharpness is highly desirable. Still, they will probably not wear dangerously on even a hard 2-week trip, and then they are not too expensive to replace. But their makers should take a hint from the European manufacturers who have been supplying such soles to Swiss and Himalayan climbers for many years and who fabricate them of much harder and considerably more durable rubber. Several American suppliers stock these lug soles, which include the Vibram and the Baramani. The quickest way to ruin shoes. Wet leather footwear can be very quickly ruined if dried out near a campfire or stove. The best treatment is to wash off any dirt and mud, wipe away any free moisture, and then allow the gear to dry slowly in the air. If the bottoms are of leather, shape will be better retained if the boots are first straightened and then stuffed with something such as dry cloths or moss. If any artificial warmth at all is used, it should be extremely mild. Even the natural enough procedure of hanging footwear at the far end of a hot cabin can very easily stiffen, shrink, and crack and ruin the leather. After they are dried, they should be rubbed with neat's foot oil or any good boot conditioner. Black bear grease and grizzly oil are, for example, favorites where they are available. These will go on easier and penetrate better if the leather is slightly warmed. Leather shoes cannot be made entirely waterproof, nor would this be desirable. They would then defeat their own purpose by trapping perspiration and soon making the feet more uncomfortably wet than, under ordinary conditions, would be the case in leather that could breathe. They may be fairly waterproof when new. After a few miles of hiking, they will leak more or less at the seams, however. While under continued immersion, some water will work through the leather. If dubbing is then worked through thoroughly into the seams, they will again be fairly waterproof for a little while until the preparation works out. This is one reason why leather footwear should be greased well once a week when in use, so treating them too often, of course, can make them too soft. When boots are to be put away until the next hunting or fishing season, it is a good idea to keep them in shape either with a boot trees or by stuffing them with crumpled newspaper, then grease them and store them away from pests in a reasonably cool and dry place. Moosehide moccasins. Genuine Indian moosehide moccasins are not made commercially, nor for that matter in quantities anywhere. Not only are there too few smoke-tanned moose hides, but particularly these days not enough squaws are willing to do the work. Money is easier to come by in other ways. It has been our experience that the only place that usually can be obtained a pair or two of them are at little trading posts and occasional trailside stores away back in the sticks in western Canada and Alaska. Nearby squaws make a few for sale at the post, and a few white women with time on their hands also turn out an occasional set. We both have often secured moosehide moccasins of our own from such sources, occasionally leaving an outline of a stockinged foot before heading into the bush and picking up the finished products upon our return. Fit is not all critical, however, and we've also done well enough from stock numerous other times. If you go north, you will probably also find it possible to secure a pair by one of these two methods. Imitation moosehide moccasins are merely tourist junk. On the other hand, moccasins made of oil-tanned leather by our better boot makers are far more practical for most purposes than the moosehide varieties. They wear longer, there is no comparison in the way they retain their shape, they are not ruined by repeated wettings, they are less expensive. In fact, you see a lot of the manufactured types these days at even the remoter trading posts. More and more the Indians don't want to be bothered with the work. The high price of red squirrel fur in much of the moccasin country is one reason. It's considerably easier to snare or shoot than process 2 or 3 of these than to eke out a pair of moccasins worth the same amount. In the subarctic, however, many Indians are still partial to their own moccasins when they can get the skins because the footwear is then practically at hand except for necessary tanning and sewing. When the weather is at all moist, they invariably wear a husky pair of the white man's rubbers over them. These rubbers are identical with the heavier rubbers seen on city pavements during rainy weather. Moose-hide moccasins wet through as soon as you start to walk over even slightly damp ground. They become, at the same time, almost unbelievably slippery. It is, for example, considerable of a task to get up a dewed, glistening slope aromatic with pine needles. The moccasin plus the rubber is similar in principle to our leather-topped lumberman's rubber. As a matter of fact, numerous aborigines these days wear the latter article much of the time. Dry sub-zero cold. But it is another matter entirely in the dry snow and the sub-zero cold of the far north. There, the basic footwear of hunters and trappers, both white and native, is the locally made moccasin. This is usually large enough to be worn with several pairs of thick woolen socks. The way one of us customarily travels when temperatures drop 30 degrees or more below freezing is with 2 heavy pairs of woolen stockings, moose-hide moccasins, a third long and heavy pair of woolen stockings, and finally low, heavy rubbers. The feet not only keep warm this way, but they remain dry. When it is time to go into a cabin, the customary procedure is to remove the outer socks and the rubbers, shaking and beating them free of snow and leaving them outside. Sometimes, depending on snow conditions, a second pair of moccasins is worn directly beneath the rubbers, and then these are treated as outdoor wear. A variation of this practice witnessed among both whites and natives is the use of ordinary fabric overshoes for the outer clothing. The third pair of socks is then ordinarily worn directly beneath the overshoes and is still removed and left outdoors before one enters a warm cabin. If the individual is going to remain inside for any considerable length of time, of course, the outerwear is brought inside and warmed. Homemade soles. When I was a youngster and hunted that full year and one additional summer and fall in the dry belt of British Columbia, living and traveling with several old mountain men and in touch now and then with bunches of Indians, we all wore buckskin moccasins. These always had a buckskin sole which we sewed into their bottoms with sinew or buckskin thongs. Whenever the sole wore through, we put on a new one. The sole lasted from 3 days to a week, depending on the weather and on how much traveling we did. One pair of moccasins would thus last over a month. One of the old mountain men had a klooch, a squaw, and I used to trade her 2 deer skins for 1 tan skin and then do my own resoling. This ratio of exchange is still common today, incidentally. We wore the moccasins with 2 pairs of socks. Your feet had to be tough and then some, but they were the most perfect footwear imaginable for high dry country. When the snows came, however, one could break his full neck wearing them in such terrain, although rough soles with cleats helped a little. But only a very sure-footed individual can cover steep snow country in moccasins with any safety. The old Plains Indians all wore soles on moccasins. See the exhibits at any large museum. Even so, the squaws were tanning skins and making moccasins all the time. Native moccasins, in any event, are most delightful to change to when you come back to camp after a day afield. Even in the biggest city, their unforgettable woodsy odor imparted by hours of tanning over smoky conflagration takes one back to the sort of campfires you get going in the wilderness at dusk.